I'm Ken Jacobson, and I'm the outings chair for Southeast Michigan Group. First, I wanted to ask kind of a little bit of an ice-breaking question, and once we get done with that, then we're going to turn the owl. Sally starts sharing her screen. You're going to see her presentation kind of in a full frame mode. But the first question I wanted to ask before we go to that is, as an opening sort of icebreaker question, I'd like to ask, what's your favorite outdoor activity and why?
Yeah, so I'm gonna hedge my bets here to basically say anything outside. I would say number one, I grew up being a snow skier, love skiing, but don't get to do it as much as I used to. Love sailing, but it, walking every day outdoors somewhere, checking out the trees and all. I love to garden, just about anything outdoors. So sorry, I can't give you something specific.
It sounds like you have seasonal favorites. Skiing
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
winter,
that's probably right.
sailing in
Yeah,
the summer.
yeah. I would say the most thing in the summer is just being able to go out in a lake, especially Lake Michigan, and kayak.
Nice,
Really love
awesome.
that. Mhm.
So I'm going to share presenter with you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. It's very nice to see everyone here. Ken had asked me to come to, he has certain sections that he wants asked that we talk about tonight. And one of the first ones was what was some lessons from my career in environmental policy and communications. So I thought I would start with that. I actually was a journalist in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when environmental information really was just starting, even though EPA and Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, all of that was in the early 70s. It really was still trying to find its legs, so to speak. And when I graduated from the University of Missouri School of Journalism, one of the best in the country, the scientists were already telling us, giving us a lot of warning about all the pollution and the impacts on it. But the average citizen really knew very little or didn't really understand what exactly people were talking about. And what I found is that we ended up writing stories that gave mostly definitions and a little bit of terror thrown in. And so at the same time, I recognized that I had not taken a science course since ninth or 10th grade. And when I did the nature walks instead of any true science stuff. So I decided to go back to graduate school and went to University of Michigan. At the time, it was the School of Natural Resources and now is called the School of Environment and Sustainability. If you have any children, grandchildren, whatever, who are interested in environmental protection, policy, sustainability, and you're interested in the Great Lakes, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It has become one of the premier international universities for Great Lakes policy and sustainability. When I went there, I focused on my master's thesis was on how to communicate difficult environmental issues, such as potential Great Lakes diversions, to increase citizen understanding, accountability, and action to protect the natural world. This was something that really, as a reporter, as a communicator, we really didn't have much information about that. There were some communication theories, but it was more how to keep the public out rather than help them understand. So I was lucky enough when I graduated to go to work for the International Joint Commission. Has anyone heard of the IJC?
I have.
Great. So the IJC is a binational organization started by a treaty called the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 between Canada and the United States. And its purpose or mission is to prevent and resolve any issues on any boundaries, Alaska to Maine, between the two countries. This has come under assault already, and we can talk about that later when we talk about Great Lakes issues. But they also were given the responsibility because of the Great Lakes. They were given the responsibility to monitor progress by the two countries to restore and protect the Great Lakes Basin. And that Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was first signed in 1972 and revised in 1978, 87, 2012, and should be going through another revision, which people are pretty reticent to do right now. I worked there for 12 years, from 1985 to 1997. And if you think about who was in political conservatives in both countries at that time, I left in 1997, and because I had a young child and taking care of my mom who had Alzheimer's. So worked on contract with a lot of different organizations that you see here, mainly on environmental communications, but also policy and some science. But the IJC actually was a really amazing job for me to be able to combine my writing and interest in environmental advocacy, and especially the Great Lakes, since I grew up here and came back here to go to grad school. We created a newsletter that went out in hard copy to 30,000 people way back when. We did extensive teacher training programs. We had scientific boards and policy boards who made recommendations and findings to the commission. And we had biennial meetings that started biennial meetings every other year. We had a public citizens meeting. We started with 280 people in a late 1980s meeting. By 1997, we had almost 3,000 people coming to those meetings. So the citizen advisory groups were really strong at that time to really generate a lot of interest in the Great Lakes and in the agreement. Sierra Club, Greenpeace, National Wildlife Federation, they were all at our meetings, hanging posters off the Grand Traverse Resort, off of Rocco House's hotel room, and the whole thing to try and garner lots of attention. It was a really exciting time. The commissioners are required every 2 years to write biennial reports based on what they hear from the citizens and from their advisory groups. And these reports were the ones we produced at that time, the 5th through the 8th reports. Again, very conservative, Reagan and Bush 1 commissioners. I'll talk a little bit more about a few of them later, but these reports were, they changed the entire direction of the International Joint Commission, because the commissioners at that time had heard enough that they came out with different theories than the traditional, yeah, you're doing okay, maybe you should do this or that sort of recommendations. They actually, many of them were attorneys, and they came up with the idea of, you need to do a weight of evidence approach to what persistent toxics you're going to take out of the environment. Not 100% proof like scientists want. We want a weight of evidence of approach. If enough is out there that the ecosystem or humans are being damaged, we need to do something about them. We need to have a zero discharge program of those substances into the Lake Superior Basin. And we need to have ballast water controls for exotic species, which of course had not happened before then, even though there were by then already dozens and dozens of exotic species in the lakes. And the other part was, I know John Hardig, I think, has come to your meetings before. I worked with John for all those 12 years. He was the lead in creating remedial action plans for the 43 areas of concern around the Great Lakes Basin. And that has become one of the most successful programs under the agreement. So when I came back to the IJC in 2015, they asked me to come back to work on a revived Great Lakes communications strategy. It had kind of lagged, and they were focusing on other basins quite a bit, because they work Alaska to Maine again. They switched to triennial reports, and those were again filled with recommendations. We did public meetings in 23 cities around the basin in order to do that, rather than one single place. These are all available online, and you can see the generations of reports and what they actually produced. So tying down 40 years into that little introduction, I'll just give you 3 lessons. Through the IJC and other organizations, I've worked with hundreds of the world's top scientists and policymakers for Great Lakes, both in government and out, especially in colleges and universities. And I have to say that of all the people I've ever met in my life, these people truly dedicate their lives, their energies, their everything to what they're doing. And their work is really essential if we're going to move forward on climate change or any other issue addressing the lakes. So I think you can imagine how, and you guys probably are too, horrified to think of all of these excellent people suddenly being told that their work is not valued. I do know that they were able to get some of the folks that work on keeping
Lampreys.
sea lampreys, sorry, I'm thinking zebra mussels. Sea lampreys out of the lakes, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission was able to get some of those back. But 20% of the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory out of NOAA has already been cut. And I already know of 13 scientists, eminent scientists on Great Lakes research who have left and been hired by the Netherlands, by Great Britain, by several other countries, which is great for them. You know, they show the value. They still feel the value for their work, but it's kind of horrifying and terrifying. And what I hope is that private foundations and businesses and universities find a way to find homes for a lot of these people, especially older folks who are ending their career. We need them around to help train the new scientists that are coming through. Through my career, I've also seen the power of citizen cohesiveness and action, like in Sierra Club, that really push the science and the policies forward, especially for the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Without that citizen action, I don't think commissioners would have been half as strongly, in their recommendations, nor do I think the governments would have responded as well. The Areas of Concern program is a wonderful example because it really has been in the citizens advisory groups in every single area of concern that has pushed it forward. On the left side, you'll see Green Bay. When I went there in 1987, when they were first starting their Area of Concern program, and we were celebrating the creation of citizen advisory groups, and commissioners went and they made a big deal about it. You couldn't see the water or the foam. The smell was horrendous. There were no boats in the water. No one was going to the shore of the Fox River or Green Bay. And I went back there. This is a picture that I went back last fall as part of the Great Lakes Great Read program and met with folks about my novel. And it is a totally different place, as you're also seeing in the Detroit River. That particular picture is a picture from my office in Windsor, where my IJC office was. And it's amazing to see when the citizen advisory groups, in the case of Detroit River, where it's a binational group, where they come together and they work with local and state and provincial and federal governments. And to see, John was just telling me a couple weeks ago that they're actually now finding river otters in the Detroit River, which is just amazing when you
I've seen some
consider.
pictures online.
Yeah, I mean, the Detroit River was truly one of the dirtiest, most polluted rivers in the entire country. It caught on fire more than 2 times, 3 times.
I've only lived here 7 years, but it's been beautiful the whole time I've lived here. How long ago was it, the mess that you're talking about?
I would say probably until nobody really started much until the mid 1980s, early 90s.
So it's been cleaned up since then.
Yeah,
The last 30 years, 40 years. Then.
Yeah, and there's still more to do. There's still a fair amount of
I'm surprised. I think the water, when you look into the water, it looks very beautiful and clean to me now, because I kayak on it and stuff and windsurf on it and stuff. So I mean, it's like, I don't know if you've ever visited China or any of the highly populated areas of the world, but the rivers in those places always look so yucky.
And that's how the Detroit River used to look. I mean, they were estimating that at least 12,000 ducks were dying every year in the grease and oil that covered the top of the Detroit River. And the Rouge River system, just what it fed in was, woo. Anyways, these are really amazing success stories for the Great Lakes region, and they are being used as examples internationally for how citizens can play a role in restoration. And that would not have happened without citizens being actively involved.
I saw a great fish die out back when I was little in the Chesapeake Bay. And I remember going to the beach when I was like 5, 6 years old. And there would be just hundreds of dead fish all along the shores everywhere. And it's not like that anymore, because I've been back to Maryland quite a few times since then. But it's amazing how much this country has started to emphasize taking care of its water resources.
Yes,
sure.
Yes. When I started my journalism career, as we talked about before, the levels of pollution and in our air, water, and soil were so high that we thought we, as journalists, had to hammer home all of the horrible ways we were destroying the planet. And while I do believe that that negative attention and information helped in passing laws and regulations to change how industry and municipalities were working, over time, we realized that that was really overwhelming for the individual citizen. And it wasn't encouraging anyone to change their behaviors. So we as environmental communicators studied other communication patterns to identify what works to create individual interest, commitment, and action. And what we came up with might sound really obvious, but at the time was a true game changer. And that is what we value, we act to protect. So the message changed first on getting people outside because the physical and psychological benefits of spending time in nature are now so well known. Some of the people I worked with at U of M were people who did the thousands of studies that showed the benefits, the personal and collective benefits of being outside, lowering our blood pressure, stress hormone levels and anxiety, reducing our feelings of isolation, and also improving our mood and cognitive function. I'm sure we all know that when we take a chance to go outside. In addition, they also found that classrooms and cafeterias that include views to green vegetation, trees, grass, whatever, are significant factors in students' increased academic performance, graduation rates, and future college performance and attendance. When I think about some of the schools that have been built around me lately, I'm not seeing many windows and green space, which makes me really nervous. But hospital patients also who have views of nature, have plants inside, anyone who's spent any time inside a hospital knows this, that you have higher, faster levels of renewed health, lower use of pain medications, and fewer post-surgical complaints. So it's a pretty obvious benefit. But the more broadly, these same studies tell us that nature also helps us to be our best selves. So the higher connectivity we have with nature, the more it enhances our psychological well-being, provides a sense of involvement, increases our interest in environmental information and our willingness to commit and sustain and protect the natural world. So those of us who love to go walking in the woods, which I know Ken likes to do,
Love to do that.
know the benefits of being out there and absorbing the phytoncides from the trees that help to elevate our immune systems and reduce stress. Or some of us like the water and the negative ions that are found whenever water is moving, and also in the mountains, and both act as natural antidepressants. So it doesn't take much time, only 20 minutes, 120 minutes per week, can be divided up any way you want or all at once, to give us that benefit of what we need from nature. And given that most of us spend time, I'm sure all of you do, spend time in parks or at your own natural workspaces, family cottages, whatever, we probably should recognize this at some level. But the reality is that most of us spend only 7% of our daily life outdoors. So now I'll stop and any questions you have.
Awesome.
Or anyone else.
Anybody have any questions?
Not comments, not questions.
No? Yeah, so just kind of build on what you're saying. That's why everyone needs to come on one of our Sierra Club outings, which is coming up in April and May. So it'll be good for your health.
There you go.
All right, so there are no questions from the folks watching at home. So we'll go on to our next question, which was how did your journey take you from fact-based advocacy to writing a fiction book?
Okay. So I found my career was incredibly satisfying, but also working in the political realm was occasionally very frustrating. My job was pretty intense. I was traveling at least a week and a half of every month. Having a young child whenever was not easy. So that was part of the reason going on to contract work. But I also have been a lifelong fiction reader, just loved fiction. And I started to think, I think it was like early 2010s, and wonder if I could use my writing skills to give voice to the Great Lakes and to the environment and nature in another way. Because what I found is that there were very few novels that included the connection or sense of nature in the way that I perceive it in my life. And nor did I find many books, very few actually, that reflected the beauty of the Great Lakes region. So luckily, I found the Stanford Online Certificate Program in Novel Writing. And I started that in 2012, really intensive remote learning program sequence over 3 years, taught 45 students from 8 different countries, all about characterization, plot, setting, editing, and more. And I learned how important it was to pick one element of story, since we were all beginning fiction writers, either plot, characterization, or setting, to really ground the story and help you. So, of course, setting was my obvious choice. I thought of all the people in the region who live and enjoy family cottages, particularly in the Great Lakes region. And so I wanted to choose a setting where a family is at their family cottage. And I wanted nature itself to be as important or as much of a character as a people in the story. And that the story hopefully inspires readers to remember and reconnect with the places that they hold dear. So I started to think, well, where could I do this? Where in this entire Great Lakes region, where do I want to set this? And I've been incredibly fortunate to spend a lot of time along the northern shores of Lake Huron and the immense beauty of the Canadian Shield. So to me, this largest mass of exposed Precambrian rock is it's just stunning, and it gives the northern Great Lakes so much of its character. The exposed rocks and cliffs remind us of the immense glaciers that created the lakes, and every stand to me of granite or pudding stones or quartz have their own unique personality. So my experience in this region led me to create the story's setting. It's an island of rock in an inland lake near Lake Huron that serves as a microcosm of the geology, flora, and fauna of the Great Lakes region as a whole. I know Ken listened to the book, so he was saying, make sure I bring the map.
I love maps, and it frustrated me I couldn't see it while I was listening to the book.
So some of the key spots that you'll see is Best Fort on the island on one end, their cabin on the other. The little dotted lines represent the hiking trails that they did up to Lindy's Peak. The North Cabin and Shepherd's Cabin was a key part of the story. And also the Manitou petroglyphs way over on the right side in Round Lake are also key parts of the story.
Sally, in your book, how large is the island?
So I'm gonna say the island, I don't know that I ever really specified it. The lake itself, I think I identified as probably about 10 miles long,
Okay.
maybe
Yeah.
a mile or two wide. So I don't know, representative there. It's a fairly large island.
Okay.
She could get
I
lost.
was
up there
curious
pretty
about
easily.
that. I couldn't
Yeah.
get that out of the story, but I
Oh,
figured
okay.
it
Oh,
was.
so you read it.
This is,
I actually listened to it, just like you did
Yeah.
Audible this
this
week.
is the real lake, right?
No.
Not
No,
fictional.
it's fictional.
Oh, okay, I thought you were referencing real geography.
No, I'm representing for those people who have read it, things in the story that they.
No, but I thought that your book was referencing real stuff, but creating fictional characters, but that's not.
No,
fiction.
I used the setting because I was familiar with it, but no, the rest of it is all fiction.
Okay,
Yeah. So hopefully the story immerses people in the beauty, breadth, and personalities of this lake and island using all of your senses. So you can see, smell, taste, and touch the fresh air and water. You can smell the fragrant flowers, the ferns, and perhaps even taste their tang. You can hear the water as it spills over the rocks or crashes in angry waves, and watch other animals living their unique lives next to your own. I spent a lot of time in the Stanford semester on characterization on the setting, much to my professor's surprise, because they had never had anyone pick setting as the main character before. And then on the human characters to drive the story's plot and themes. So I decided to create a 3-generation family. This I could say is kind of from me because my grandparents were very important to me. That all had deep bonds with each other and with the island and lake, as well as a community of summer and permanent residents. Most important to me was defining each character in terms of their innate connection with nature. And for those of you who have started reading the book or have read it, on one end, you have the Ojibwe or Anishinaabe characters who their entire culture is deeply rooted in place and nature. And then different characters in the middle, and Kate, who is the mom, grew up in a very urban setting, and she is the least comfortable in nature, is probably a nice way to say it.
Even a little scared by it.
Yeah,
So the
very
closest,
scared by it.
Yes.
the closest I've read to anything like this, because I haven't read your book yet,
Mhm.
was like Michener's books. I don't know if you ever read John Michener, but he writes these really thick books. And he spends an enormous amount of time detailing out the geography of the area that he's currently working at,
Mhm.
describing.
Mhm.
I was wondering, is that an inspiration for you at all, or was it strictly from your work that you were inspired?
Part of it, well, I wouldn't say Michener specifically. I would say some of the authors, we were talking earlier about Wallace Stegner. He was someone who certainly inspired me. Very slow start kind of books, introduces all the detail. The first couple chapters are really just kind of setting the stage or in more current times, and then you go back and meet the family at the island after some different things have happened. And yeah, to me, the setting was really important. As I said, I really wanted it to be a character in itself. And so how everybody interacts with it and with each other, what their connections are and how their interactions and connections or lack thereof with nature and the island, how that impacts how they actually interact with others was a key part of the story.
Is your fiction strictly fiction though, or is it based on anything real?
It's got elements. I mean, it has elements in it of, like she talked about, like the Manitou pictographs and things like that. I mean, there's definitely elements. It's based kind of like Michener. I mean, it's based on an actual kind of region,
Yeah.
but the actual immediate setting is
Oh,
fiction.
so it's pure fiction in Michener's books for sure, but he's trying to describe what he thought may have been
He's
like.
he's not pure fiction. He's got a lot of fact and stuff in it, in
Well,
his
right,
in his
well-
characters and his setting.
Yes, exactly, but I mean, it's still a fictional possibility of what may have actually happened. Basically, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, certainly the setting could be real. It's a fictional life, but it could be very real. And, there are a lot of things, cultural traditions and stuff with the Anishinaabe and everything is very real.
Cool.
So, speaking of that, I've had the good fortune of working with several US tribes and Canadian First Nations over the years and learning about the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe culture. And as I said before, which is deeply rooted in nature and place. Because they also have lived in the Northern Lake Huron region for centuries, I couldn't imagine not writing the book without including them. They also provide the opportunity because the main character, Bess, her grandparents came from Wales. And so to be able to juxtapose their beliefs and traditions with a very Anglo-Saxon culture in this family was really helpful. I would say that as far as writing itself, which I think some of the themes and character messages Ken wanted me to also talk about. And the strangest thing is that the characters, Beth and the other characters, really took over the story early on in the writing process. It was exhilarating, but it was terrifying after having lived my entire life in fact-based writing. It took a long time for me to get used to it. And I had an outline. I had 3x5 cards up on a wall, right? And I thought this is what everything was going to happen. But every time I would sit down, if I tried to focus on listening rather than controlling the narrative, they deepened the story. Many times I'd sit down to write at night, expecting to write a scene a certain way, and it would go an entirely different way. I can tell you that a lot of the major things that happened as far as the plot, I didn't have them in there. They had them in there. So, but what emerged was actually a plot that focused on what happens when all of these characters' connections to nature and to each other and to their special place are taken away from them. And what are the consequences of not being a part of a place in nature that's part of your soul and their sense of who they are. So as each character acts with the best of intentions, with the result being the worst of outcomes, they're each forced to respond according to their own sense of self, what they love and fear, and who and what they'll choose to be loyal to. So how might each character come of age was one of the questions I asked, no matter what their own biological age. The grandfather, to me, comes of age as much as his 3 grandchildren. But how do they discover what is most valuable to them personally? So these were the kind of questions and others that I used to help hopefully write a novel that immersed readers in the beauty of nature and the Great Lakes and help them to consider the powerful gifts that nature gives to us, that a place can be as much a part of us as the air we breathe, and when we honor our own path is when we're truly home. So, as I say, I started the Stanford program in 2012. It took the 3 years of the Stanford program to write the first draft. It took 2 more years, a ton of research. And if you've read the book, you'll understand 11 more drafts of the ending before I and my beta readers, which are a group of people that read every draft with you. They might have been my one of my Stanford professors or colleagues. They could have been some of my professional colleagues. I had Anishinaabe people reading it as well. And you'd be amazed how many times I think, okay, we got it this time. We got it this time. Eighth ending especially. And one person came back and said, nope, I still don't buy it. And so we had to keep imagining endings to figure out, okay, how do we get to this point where we understand it? We understand everybody's hopes and fears and how they end up where they end up. So anyways, it was all that time afterwards where we all felt comfortable sending it out to publishers for consideration.
It sounds like this was not just your writing, but a whole collaboration with a bunch of people
Yeah, it was always my writing, but they were always
influencing it.
influencing it. Yes, I wanted to make sure, especially the Anishinaabe folks, I wanted to make sure that I was being true to their culture. I wanted to make sure that people understood where the different characters went as a result of several conflicts that happen in the story. So, yeah, I wanted it to be, a team approach with people that were valuable to me.
It's funny because I've always perceived as authors as living this solitary life, creating this great fictional work, and sounds like that wasn't necessarily how it worked for you.
Well, it wasn't as far as having a Stanford program because we would, workshop different scenes and stuff together. But yeah, it is very solitary for a lot of it, but I chose to have a fairly significant beta group to work from. Not everybody does, but I did.
Everyone has at least an editor usually when they're writing a book, and they usually have some major impacts on things.
So as I said before, the novel was published in September 2020, the height of COVID. So releasing it and, I got used to a lot of Zooms, not necessarily knew the technology that well. It has received 7 national and international awards, but most importantly, I've met in person or via Zoom. I think this is my 87th time or something.
Wow.
Talking with folks. And I've met with readers and nature lovers in US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Wales, and in book clubs and groups such as yours. And what I've really loved about it is so many people share their own personal stories of where they love to be in nature, of their family cottages, of things that they've experienced and how those experiences in nature have changed their lives. And so this kind of provided the perfect circle to bring home why I wrote the novel and what I hope to accomplish through its publication. So do you want me to stop here and we'll?
Yeah, there's actually been some conversation in the chat.
Okay.
So, and some of it's comments, if there's a question in here too. So, Jim writes, I'm 78 and was around when the lakes were pretty nasty. With climate change and our nation's step backwards on environmental issues, what do you think the lakes will be like when you are 78?
Oh, well, that's only a decade away for me. So they're still, they're even better. I know we're getting into Great Lakes stuff, the next thing, but I'll just say for me, the current situation is terrifying. But I also recognize if we can learn to consider the issues that we have to address, climate change being absolutely the number one, with a sense of resilience versus resistance. And resilience, I mean, Indigenous tribes in the UP and in Ontario are already stocking their lakes with warm water fish. They're already coming down here, getting things for oak trees and, you know, seedlings, and intentionally planting them north. They're recognizing what is to come. They're already seeing harmful algal blooms in Lake Superior. Those are not like Lake Erie. There's a reason why those are happening, and it's us. But in Lake Superior, that is truly climate change. And so we have to figure out ways to hopefully negate that. But at the same time, we also have to realize we have to be resilient, because especially the way the political situation is now, this is only going to get worse for the next however long this lasts.
Hopefully it's only 2 weeks.
Wouldn't that be nice?
2 weeks. I think hopefully it's only
I know.
2 years.
Know something we don't. Do you have a plan? That's good.
There's several other comments here, but I'm not gonna read them all. Is there any other questions about the plot, the book, or anything like that?
Did you grow up going to a cottage? Is that where you get most of your?
Part of the time I did,
Uh-huh.
and part of the time it was a particular area my family loved, my grandparents especially. My grandfather would go up there and hunt and fish all the time, and
Yeah.
yeah. But my family is not this family, I can guarantee
No,
that.
So I have a question without giving too much away.
Mhm.
So you're talking about how the characters really kind of wrote their own story.
Mhm.
So as you connected with them and got to know them and know how they would act or respond to things, the story kind of unfolded.
Mhm.
How about the end of the book?
Mhm.
Did that kind of unfold too, or did you kind of have in your head how you thought it was gonna end, or did it end the way you thought when you started writing the book it was going to end?
It didn't end as far as I thought it would. Things were not quite as resolved in some cases as I thought they would be. But I felt like it was done, because to me, being able to then allow each reader to imagine the future for this family and how they wanted, how it was going to unfold from there. I like to have a very positive outlook about it, but some readers have not. So everybody reads from their own personal perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, but understand too that at the Stanford program, you're writing 10 to 15 pages for each character about who they are as people and what their values are and what will they do in different situations. So they kind of take on a life of their own within the process anyways. And I was just surprised at how they had totally different ideas than I did.
So I actually do have a couple questions. So Meryl's asking, I haven't read the book. Do those who have prefer audio version or reading it yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I liked audio because I could do other things at the same time, and it allowed me to read it in 3 days or to listen to it in 3 days.
Yeah.
So it's harder to sit down with a book.
Yes, yeah. There's an ebook too, but you're still
And the
sitting.
narrative is really good. I was gonna ask you if you were part of that selection of the narrator or.
Yeah, that was during COVID. And my publisher did not do audiobooks at the time, so I found her on my own. She was actually a Broadway actress
Oh.
who was back in Toronto. She's Canadian and back in Toronto during COVID. And Not only did she grow up on the shores of Lake Huron, but her partner is Welsh.
Okay.
And so she knew
had it
how
all.
to
Yeah.
say, there's Welsh words in the book.
Yeah,
As well as Anishinaabe. So, as soon as I talked with her and she read a little bit for me, oh, wow, this is
yeah.
an
she was
easy
good.
choice.
Mhm.
I hadn't thought about that because the narrator does sound very natural with the terms, and then
Mhm,
it sounds like someone that really does know the area.
yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
Mhm.
All right, so another question here. Oh, I think whether, you like reading actually a book or listening to it, I think it's kind of a personal preference. Sometimes I do both.
Mhm.
Well, the
So-
library didn't have it. Anita
Yeah.
did Schuler's books.
Mhm.
I don't have Amazon Prime, so I thought I'm just gonna get it on Audible, so.
Yeah, you can always go to bookshop. They always
Yeah.
have it. Libro has it. Barnes and Nobles usually has it.
I went there too, they didn't have it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, usually when they order, if you order it, they'll get it.
And,
But
and-
Amazon
and
has
we
it.
have it right here in front of us, if anyone's interested in buying a copy. Okay, so David's asking, do you communicate with other authors who include the environment and the natural world in their books? And if so, who?
Yeah, so, I'm in the nonfiction world, I know Jeff Goodell really well. He's an environmental reporter. His books, The Waters Will Rise and He Will Kill You First, are amazing books. If not particularly encouraging, but Charlotte McConaughey is someone who I have become very good friends with. There's another nonfiction Great Lakes writer named Dave Dempsey, John Hardy. Jerry Dennis. There's a lot of Great Lakes authors who we communicate with on a fairly regular basis. William Kent Kruger is not necessarily always considered an environmental writer, although he writes very tightly like a Michener in as far as the scenes and surroundings. He is just an amazing person. And the other one I would say would be Louise Erdrich, who's a Native American author, and she's another wonderful person.
Ed's got a question. What were the challenges in making nature a vibrant character co-equal with human characters?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of what you were talking about raising before, is trying to have that balance. A lot of times people are really into plot. And, how do you move a plot along when you're talking about this, what's going on in nature? And so it was so much of the characters interacting in nature. There are scenes, for example, sailing and different things happening, where nature is playing a very obvious role in how their lives are unfolding, I guess is the best way to put it. For me, I was writing most of it either in my office at home, which had a nice window looking out at, but not the setting of the book. But I felt most of the time that I could close my eyes and, meditate a little bit, and I could see it, I could hear it, I could feel it. And also, once the character of the setting became so primary to me, I probably wrote more about that than I did the characters themselves, the human characters.
When you say nature is a character, is there narration in the book where nature is expressing itself somehow?
No,
Or is it just, it becomes obvious, somehow or another?
More like a personality or a force?
Well, the thing is, how does it express itself in a book? I don't quite get how that would be the case, except for, obviously if you have a thunderstorm, it's angry. But I mean, besides that, I'm having a hard time how you made nature a character per se.
well, I think for me, it was just making sure at all times that you knew the setting that the characters were in, number one, and number two, most of the things that were happening, they were happening outside. And the interactions that characters had with each other were dependent on them fishing or going loon diving or different things like that. And so, at all times, nature was playing a pretty major role while they were at the island.
And there is a storm too. Any other questions, or we'll kind of move on? Yeah, and Merrill mentioned here in the comments that a few libraries and uh, their consortium, which is Chelsea, have it. So a lot of local libraries have the
A
book
lot of
too.
local libraries have it, a lot of them in northern Michigan, since it was made a Great Lakes Great Read for 24-25. Pretty much most libraries in Michigan have them. They may not have a lot of copies, but
Smaller.
yeah, especially the smaller libraries.
All right, so the next topic we wanted to talk about was why do you believe the Great Lakes are so valuable, and what are the current priorities for their conservation?
Okay. So any presentation I do about the novel or anything else, I'm always insistent on sharing a few facts. They're probably ones that most of you or all of you will know about our precious Great Lakes. We all know that, of course, they hold 20% of the world's most of the Earth's fresh surface water, or 6 quadrillion gallons. I actually had an 8th grader ask me that once and stumped. I never forget that anymore. With the St. Lawrence River, they span almost half of the North American continent. The watershed is one of the world's most diverse after the Amazon rainforest, with 3,500 species of plants and wildlife, and more than 250 species of fish. Up to 40 million of us get our water from the lakes, and food, 37% of the agricultural land that's devoted in the watershed. You also know that the Great Lakes and their natural resources have provided the foundation for the economies of both countries for centuries, from early ventures in logging, mining, and commercial fishing to today's vast shipping, manufacturing, agricultural, and tourism. In fact, this always shocks me. If the 8 states and 2 provinces surrounding the Great Lakes region were a separate country, which sometimes I'm thinking that's a good idea, its economy would actually be the 3rd largest in the world by gross domestic product.
Oh, that's very.
Pretty impressive. So virtually from every perspective, from my viewpoint, it's impossible to overstate the vital link that we have with the lakes and the species that live in and around them. And the topics that I'll just run through real quickly, and I know a lot of people probably know more about them, some of them, than I do, but the first one is I want to recognize that we have made incredible progress. For someone who's been here 7 years, that you don't know how the Detroit River used to look is really a positive thing. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and especially the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is passed in Congress every year as part of the budget. A third of that money goes
this year.
a third of that money actually goes to cleaning up areas of concern. We have a very strong bilateral Great Lakes Task Force in Congress who push really hard to get, and they have been able to raise more money for funding in the last couple of years. They are getting ready to, I think one of the last things that Senator Peters wants to do is to actually propose a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Act, so that it would no longer be in the annual budget. It would actually get its own funding every year. And so that's, we'll hope that will come off, right? The other. Up again.
I mean, historically, it's had really good support from both sides. And there is actually hope that the vice president being from Ohio might help get some support for the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna get too much environmental support from the current administration.
You never know.
Yeah. I flipped forward on slides, so I'll just say what microplastics obviously is a huge one. We do not have the technology on our wastewater treatment plants to clean out microplastics from our water. And so every time, we use plastics in our homes, it goes in there, it's still getting out in the lakes. And if I hadn't flipped forward, you would have seen a map of all the blue where all of the microplastics are coming out into the lakes from those plants. I think the persistence of trying to find safer forms of plastic and eliminate them from our lives as much as possible. I think that is as important as climate change for the impact that these microplastics are having throughout the food chain. Lake Erie Habs, I was going to mention, that is just a perfect example of the disconnect between findings and action. we know it has to happen, but the factory farms that own Northwest Ohio are not letting it happen. And they're continuing the negative practices. So that is a huge, huge one to be worked on. And I don't think that's gonna happen until politics change in Ohio, but one can always hope. The line 5, you guys, there's Elaine Coleman, you guys are already actively involved in line 5. And so you all probably already know that, there was appeal made for level of water flow out of Traverse City along with indigenous, groups yesterday to the Michigan Supreme Court to try and, stop or turn back the tunnel permit by the Michigan, Public Service Commission. So that's obviously an ongoing one. And the last one I would say is, as we've already talked about, Trump's perspective towards environment and specifically Canada. At the first meeting he had with Trudeau in January, the first thing he said to him is that he doesn't agree with any of the treaties or agreements between the two countries that has to do with its border. He pulled out of the Columbia River Treaty, which Biden was 2 days from signing the renegotiation when he left. And Trump has now pulled fully out of it. He wants to have more control over the dams and water rights. He also doesn't believe that the Great Lakes should be shared equally by Canada and the United States. So that is one to keep a real close eye on so that we hopefully continue to treat them as amazing gifts from nature rather than
A political football.
and pieces of commerce. So I'll stop here again, Steve.
Awesome. By the way, Charlie said that sounds great. He just ordered the paperbacks.
Oh, thank you.
Any questions about what Sally was just talking about?
The title, The Best Part of Us,
Mhm.
what's that? Why is that the name of the book?
Well, anyone who's read the book want to take a gander?
To me, it was kind of a referral to nature.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, one of the characters, kind of the relationship, the family and with place and her special relationship with the place, it really was the best part of her. So I think that's kind of where I took it away.
So in other words, maybe it's the environment that they're in is the best part of us.
Of each.
Just curious.
Jane, did you have a question?
Maybe this will become evident as I continue to read it. Why Welsh? Why did you choose for them to be Welsh?
That was, I wanted to have them come somewhere from an Anglo-Saxon European country, and I thought, what's the country I know very little about? You know, we all hear about Germany and France and all that from World War II. We hear about so many other European countries. Wales is just this little tiny thing, and the more I researched it, the more I realized that they are a very nature-focused country as well.
That's true. Yeah,
The Lammas Day celebrations, just their whole,
it's the Celtic
lot of
traditions.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of the Celtic traditions are very nature-based, so, yeah. And I enjoyed researching something I didn't know.
And this sells kind of like worship trees or something like that.
A lot of things
Before,
like that.
before, they were Christian religion
Yeah.
dominated the world or whatever.
What
Western Europe.
is on your agenda moving forward?
What's next for you?
Yeah, so should we talk about storytelling first, or?
Well, sure, because that might be a good one to kind of end with, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
No?
And also David's asking online, what's your favorite spot on the Great Lakes?
Oh, wow. There are many.
Top 3?
Oh, gosh.
You don't want to offend anyone?
No, it's fine. I love, Sleeping Bear Bay and all of the trails that make up the dunes, Lakeshore. The Apostle Islands on Lake Superior and Pictured Rocks. And anywhere along the northern Lake Huron shoreline.
Nice. So the last kind of prepared topic that we had was, how can storytelling be a powerful tool in environmental advocacy? And that was a big part of why I wanted to invite you to come and speak to our group today because we have so many people involved in environmental advocacy.
Mhm.
And, how can they be better effective using storytelling maybe versus some of their other techniques they're using today?
Okay, I'll try and be brief on this one. I think that whether we're telling our own personal stories, we're reporting facts, or we're writing fiction, they're all a form of storytelling. And if we share them, if we are brave enough to share even our most minor stories of our connections with nature, they have a really strong personal and collective change, not only for ourselves, but also for the people we interact with. And I want to give you just 3 examples of people that just totally changed my life and my perspective about my work and also about nature. The first guy on the left, Gordon Jernell, he was a Bush 1 appointee, and he was head of the Indiana Republican Party. Can't get much more conservative.
Sally? I don't think people would understand what you're talking about appointing. The president appoints the commissioners.
Yes,
And
sorry.
there's 3 and 3.
Yes, the president and the prime minister appoint 3 commissioners each to the commission, and they serve at the pleasure of the president. So obviously, when they change, then new commissioners come in. But Bush appointed Jernell because he was very central into Bush 1's victory as a president. He was an incredibly quiet and observant person. We were never sure what he thought when he was listening to policymakers or scientists report their findings out to him. But he kept asking the same researcher to come and talk and give updates on her scientific research and findings. He would listen closely, but he rarely asked questions. As staff, that drove us nuts because we didn't know who this new commissioner guy, what he was thinking. The other guy, Honorable Davy Fulton, man, what a character. He was a member of parliament, also an attorney, but also was a Supreme Court Justice of British Columbia. And so just steeped in the legal. These 2, he was also a very avid listener. Just the questions he would ask were just way above me. But the 2 of them became really inseparable to the point where they'd have meals together all the time. They would have separate meetings in their offices, staff, no one else there, even the other commissioners. And we didn't know until there were 4 staff that we sat down with them to start writing those Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement biannual reports, what exactly they were talking about. These 2 men are Fulton's keen legal expertise, Jernell's understanding of all of the research this scientist was providing to them. They were the ones that came up with the weight of evidence approach recommendations and zero discharge and persistent toxics, virtual elimination. And they even went so far as to suggesting reverse onus, which if you have any legal backing behind you, that means that a corporation would have to prove that a compound or a product was not dangerous to humans or the environment before it was used. And that's obviously never been the case in our country. So we wondered, what was it that really drove these 2 men to do what they did? And in Gordon Jernell's case, he had 2 sisters that lived on Indiana farms. And within 8 years of each other, they both died prematurely of 3 different cancers. He wanted to understand why and stop others from experiencing the same effects. For Fulton, he lived in Northwest British Columbia, and there was intense drilling going on at the time and development. At the same time, he was a commissioner, and that led to the loss of his home and property that his family had had for generations, as well as nature preserves that he had frequented since he was a child. So their life stories really directly impacted their roles as commissioners in ways that we never would have expected, and also allowed other commissioners after them to take a whole different perspective as to what they could do in their jobs. So Gordon Jernell kept asking one person to give these same presentations over and over. And her name is Theo Colburn. I'm getting a little, because she's my shiro. She was an amazing woman. Her own story is that she was the wife of a rancher in Colorado. They had cattle, they had crops, whatever. And her husband died in 3 years of thyroid and liver cancer. And she had increasing immune issues and literally very little she could eat as far as a diet. So at 46, after her husband died, she sold the ranch and went to school for her PhD in pharmacology and started studying the effects of persistent toxic substances and especially herbicides and pesticides on human health. She was then hired by World Wildlife Fund, and she studied the impacts of those throughout the food chain. And she used us at the IJC to bring together scientists from around the world who studied every part of the food chain and what these chemicals were doing to them. She is my shiro because as part of her research, she was dogged about it. She found a woman named Anna Soto who was studying the impact of estrogen on breast cancer at Tufts University. She had been doing research for about 6 months when suddenly she started having confounding impacts or results, and she couldn't figure out. It took her 6 months. She investigated, cleaned out everything in her lab, couldn't figure it out. Finally went to Corning, who made the plastic flasks that she used in her study, the plastic tubes. And they admitted to her that they had changed the compounds in their plastic flasks, but they wouldn't tell her what they were called, what was in them. So she sent the flasks to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who came back and told her that the tubes now contained nanophenols, which mimic estrogen. At the same time, Theo also found Dr. David Feldman at Stanford, who was experiencing the same confounding results with polycarbonate flasks, which were leaching bisphenol A. This was in 1988, and yet it took 12 years before that got into the consciousness of the public and the media, and we started to look at possibly outlawing these chemicals. That's how much time it takes. So she brought all these people together. She did groundbreaking research and reports, and her own book, Our Stolen Future. It's like Rachel Carson, it's just, if you read it, it's just, wow, you start to understand. So anyways, like all of these people, I'm sure you have your own stories to tell about how the natural world destroys and sustains you. And we can look at many writers who share their stories and information about birds and trees and whatever, even going back to Thoreau and Emerson, of course. But I'm really encouraged because we're finding so many more nature and environment fiction writers who are becoming increasingly popular and are expanding the collective consciousness of connections with and how we impact nature and live within it. So I can only hope that my novel contributes a very small part of that progress. And I challenge all of you to, if you have stories you'd like to tell, to share them, because they do have an impact. Those 3 people impacted all of us in ways that we had no clue that they were even doing it. Sorry, we went longer than the hour.
Awesome. There's no questions. Oh, I'm a writer who's interested in Great Lakes centered stories. Could you please repeat a few of the other Midwest Great Lakes fiction writers you mentioned? And this was Amy. Hey, Amy, you know what? I think I'll get together with Sally after this and we'll send a follow-up to everyone with
Yeah, I have a
with
whole
some
list of them.
suggestions, see out some different writers and books and stuff.
I'd be happy to.
And I know you had a question which we're
Curious what you have on your plate for the future.
Yeah, I still do some environmental writing, different organizations that I serve on boards for and involved with. I have characters playing around in my head for a next story. Can't quite get there yet for themes. Part of it, this novel being chosen for Great Lakes Great Reef, is sending me around the basin, or at least it was until a month ago when Trump cut the Great Lakes Great Reef program as part of NOAA. So we'll see what happens with that.
and that's where I found you,
Yes.
was through that program.
Yeah. So, kind of enjoying learning how to be retired a little bit too, but still do a lot of writing. Yeah.
She's gonna start coming on our hikes too. First one's April 12th.
Yeah.
So hope to see you all there.
Well, we hike a lot, me and Marion, I don't know about you.
We got 1 to 12.
We hike two times a week on average, but probably not with Sierra Club.
So, Sally, so Peggy's saying she'd like to buy your book. So where would be the best place you'd recommend online if she wants to buy the book?
Probably Bookshop,
Bookshop?
yeah,
.com?
I could tell, yeah, bookshop.com. Libro is their audio one if she prefer audio. You know, I mean, I could send her to Amazon, but you know, Target has it, Barnes and Noble.
So there's a lot of places that you can go to
If
buy it
she's,
online.
if she wants to do any bookstore, she could do Bay Books up in Sutton's Bay,
Bay Books.
Cottage Books in, Glen Arbor, Horizon Books in Traverse City.
They'll send it to you.
Yeah,
The
they'll,
Book Nook in Montague.
they have it as
The
well,
retail
and they
place
can
of it?
send it. you know,
That's where our cottage is.
Cool. You know, any of these places that you go to, all you have to do is ask them to order it.
Yeah.
And they can get it usually within 3 or 4 days.
There are links on your website,
There are links on my website as well.
and your website address is?
Sally Cole-Misch.com.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone online for participating. This recording will be available. We're gonna have it within the next week or so out on our YouTube channel. And so if you really enjoyed this and you want to share it with others, we'd love you to pass it along. Thanks and have a good night.